Welcome to the module on political economy of financial markets. In terms of the financial markets, as it has been observed in almost all the advanced nations of the world, that financial market has been one of the strong and the dynamic sectors as far as the modern economies are concerned, because they are not only involved in the channelization of the funds to investment, but also they deal with the efficient allocation of capital and risk. So any kind of capital management and the risk management are taken up as one of the most important functions of the financial market. So the functioning of the financial market is not only driven by the economic factors, but mostly by the political considerations. So this is a point of departure from the economic dimensions of financial markets, which makes it module to be discussed in the grounds of political dimensions of how the financial markets operate. Because the finance is basically linked up with the economic landscape, but also the political structure plays an important role. So political economy of the financial markets basically refers to the interaction, or basically it is an intersection between the politics and the finance, whereby the functioning and the outcomes of the financial markets are influenced, and definitely it is a complex and a dynamic process, so that there can be a good interplay between the three entities: politics, economics, and finance. So financial markets will be definitely instrumental in shaping up the global economy, and definitely it will also be helpful in facilitating the cross-border trade as well as the flow of capital and investment. So in all considerations, financial market will be instrumental in developing the entire regime of growth and other factors. Financial markets are mainly determined by the economic factors, but they are not only being driven by the market forces. Because in the domain of economics, or the school of thought in the economics, they will say that the financial market is largely driven by the forces of demand and supply. But that is not a complete story, because any dynamics of financial market also is deep rooted in its political dimensions. So this refers to the wide range of political, social, and definitely economic factors that will influence the mindset or the behavioral pattern of the market participants, because this also takes care of the cultural and the social factors. Secondly, it will also take care of the policies of the regulatory authorities, particularly in terms of pro or in terms of policies which are taken up. The structure of the financial institutions also will play an important role, particularly in terms of the functioning that are being done. So it is actually an interdisciplinary approach where we want to explain the political economy of financial markets not only from the domain of only economics, but also as a kind of a synergy between economics, politics, and finance. And it also involves a large arena of disciplines like political science, sociology, and definitely law. So in this particular context of this political economic view of these financial markets, we have to uncover the underlying power relations and definitely the interest that shape up the financial markets. So we can talk about the pioneers of the financial market like IMF, World Bank, but whatever be the economic functions of these institutions, but they also have a kind of a political ideology, because all these institutions are also driven by some political ideologies which has been deep rooted. So as a matter of fact, they will influence the overall political and the social outcomes. The social outcomes would be based on welfare maximization. The political outcomes will be based on the democratic power of the government. So this will definitely take care of the financial institutions which will act as the major participants like banks, investment funds, companies, and also the government regulators, and thereby they can regulate the behavior of the financial market. So it has been seen that by the 2008 financial crisis, it has also been playing an important role to understand the politics of these financial markets. because though it has been connected with the financial market to the real economy, but the entire world has been exposed to some kind of risk. And these risks are basically spread out in the political and in the social dimensions. It's also highlighted in this intersection between the politics, economics, and finance about the need for a comprehensive approach for a good regulatory body so that the financial market regulation can come up and the political and the economic factors can play an important role. These also come up with a more research topic in terms of the research dimensions, where they want to relate any economic phenomena with the other disciplines like its social impact, political impact, and giving in a proper shape. So thereby any kind of new technologies which are coming up and which are debated like blockchain and cryptocurrency, and thereby they calls for appropriate role of the government and regulation in the financial markets. So with the advent of the financial markets in the global economy, it is very much important to understand the nature of the policy makers, the investors and the scholars, and how they can be instrumental in this entire dynamics. This refers to the history of the financial markets, particularly within the political economic dimension. So more importantly, when we talk about the historical foundation, we refer to the exchange of the goods and services. And this exchange are basically being done between the traders. But with the modern financial market in the 18th century, we have the establishment of the stock market in the Europe, and thereby the most important arena started. Moreover, we have seen that when the industrialization and the large corporations are coming up across the globe, then also there has been a need for individual investors' provision. Because there is a need to start or come up with new ideas, to gain some entrepreneurial skills, and thereby some exchange of ideologies, both from the political and from the economic dimensions. And thereby this kind of stock markets are basically a platform where the shares can be sold to the public and thereby democratizing the entire ownership of corporations. So this democratizing the ownership of corporations basically refers to a kind of a political dimension, a political flavor in terms of electing the top authorities of these democratic organizations through an electoral system. So over time, the financial markets have been evolved and it has spread its boundaries over the economic dimensions, and also it has enabled the investors to take up more and more investment in the stocks and taking care of the future prospects of the asset prices, which also deals with law and governance in their respective areas. It has been seen that with the advent of the mutual funds and with the advent of the stock market, one of the most important instrument had been the bonds. So bonds are providing a means for the companies and the governments to borrow money from the investors, making the interest payments periodically until the bond matures. So that is how the bond market operates. In the same way, we talk about the options, the futures, the derivatives, which also are driven by the market movements, and thereby they want to reap the profits. So with the advent of the 20th century, and in this transition from 18th century to 20th century, the most important aspect of globalization of the financial market has increased the scope and the complexity of this entire dynamics. And definitely the financial markets have become more and more interdependent. There has been exchange of ideologies, exchange of ideas, and then more importantly, the cross-border flows have improved over time. So this has basically led to greater level of efficiency, and this efficiency is basically measured in terms of cost reduction exercises, greater level of risk in the financial markets nevertheless, but with the combination of all these authorities together, that is the political, the economic and the legal dimensions, this has led to better functioning in the modern economy, and which has come up with a vital source of capital. This actually refers to what is the role of the regulatory body, particularly government and also the concept of international politics in the financial markets. Because the financial markets are not only driven by the economic factors, but they are also being determined by the political changes or the political dynamics. So thereby we need to go for a multifaceted approach in order to explain the functioning of the financial markets across the globe. So first and foremost, it is the government or the state which must play a commanding heights or which must play a pivotal role in establishing the legal and regulatory framework that govern the financial markets. So a separate kind of statute or guidelines are very much needed, which has to come up with the government so that there can be proper regulatory body or regulations to follow. And this includes developing and enforcing laws and regulations related to financial institutions. Particularly, these are more important for financial transactions. Definitely the security management, and most importantly the protection of the investor. This calls for a proper regulatory and a legal framework. In doing so, they will try to seek a balance between the stakeholders, investors, institutions, and the broader economy. So we can see that all these stakeholders will come up one to one. They will have a good bondage so that the financial markets may be in a better operative stage. More importantly, we can see that the degree and the nature of the securities in the financial markets vary across the countries because they cannot be expected to be uniform. Though we talk about globalization, that the financial markets are interconnected, but it does not mean that they will follow a uniform policy or their implementation will be done in a uniform basis. Because this is not possible, because each of the nation follow a different political and demographic structure. By the political factors, we mean political ideologies, definitely institutional capacity, because every country has certain limitations in terms of institution or in terms of infrastructure, and definitely economic conditions. So most of the countries would be actually embracing the market-friendly approach. They will be more open or liberal. Some countries will be more conservative and they require government intervention. So this is not a kind of a new story because this has a legacy of these countries, whether the countries prefer to go for more conservatism or the countries want to go for more liberal move. This will also affect the effectiveness of this government regulation because any kind of government regulatory body also calls for some effectiveness in the policy, and that can be governed by any kind of indications on transparency, investors' protection, because these two are to be taken up from the view of the political or from the view of the governance. And then only they can ensure efficiency and stability. This also calls for a very proper and efficient public institutional capital. However, the regulations also restrict the activities of the financial institutions because these regulations also sometimes come out to be more stringent because they want to protect the investor, they want to protect the domestic producers. So in most of the cases, they might not be very much liberal in opening up all the sectors to international finance. They might be quite stringent in that. So in all these cases, they can limit the availability of the credit and the financial services. So the policymakers must strike a balance between the regulation and the market efficiency. So this will bring the concept of international politics. Because when we talk about international politics, we basically refer to how the shaping up of financial markets can be done, particularly in the globalized era. So this will definitely take care of the cross-border flows, definitely bring about greater financial integration, and that will also heighten the need for coordination among the countries so that the risk of cross-border can be mitigated. So this definitely deals with some kind of synergy in these all dynamics when we talk about politics, globalization, and economics together. Then only we can talk about a good international stability, particularly the coherence across the different nations. Another important dynamics of international finance has been the dependence on the exchange rate. Because this exchange rate is highly volatile in nature, So the countries are always exposed to all this kind of financial risk, which takes care of capital controls and which are basically monitored by the IMF or International Monetary Fund. But on the other hand, all the domestic nations, through proper regulatory framework, should try to establish market stability and also try to prevent such that the risks do not have any contagion effect to the rest of the globe. Because this will definitely come up as the politics of international finance. Because when we talk about the politics of international finance, this will be more coordinated approach. So in this particular dynamics, we can see that the role of the government, the role of the international politics is complex. Definitely government is making a balance in order to make all the operations to be done in one go. But at the same time, the risks are also associated with cross-border flows so that the global financial stability gets affected. So this is definitely taking care of the ideological differences among the different nations and how it can accelerate with the economic dimensions of financial markets. This refers to the politics of financial crisis and regulation. Because here we need to take up some of the case studies through which we want to explain how the financial crisis, which has been being driven by economic factors, also has some political dynamics in it. So financial crises are not just economic events. Whether we talk about 2008 financial meltdown, or we talk about the exchange crisis of Dubai, or we call about the Brexit, which has been solely determined by the political dimensions more than economic, we can see that they have also some political implications. One of the political implications of financial crisis is the potential for social unrest and loss of faith in the government institutions. So any kind of current government or the government which is currently in the power, some kind of credibility is there, but so there has been some kind of initiatives to shackle or basically to make it more turbulent, particularly in terms of the credibility of the people across the current government institutions. And this will definitely bring in social unrest and the political instability. So this is also being explained by the distribution of the losses. These are basically referred to the loss to the society, which is called the deadweight loss, where there is no return, or the loss to the consumers and the producers at a time. So this has been one of the major issue, particularly one of the major political issues, which talks about the losses which can be multidimensional. Also, we find out the governments are under extreme bankruptcy, particularly the banks, and they are called often to bail out, which can be basically considered as an unfair transfer of wealth from the taxpayers to the wealthy elites who control these institutions. Because it has been seen that most of these institutions are capitalistic in nature, and they are largely driven by the capitalistic mindset, who are mainly the elite classes where the wealth is concentrated. But because of this advent of the crisis, when there is a loss in the credibility or the trust in these financial institutions, there has been unfair transfer of wealth from the taxpayers to the wealthy nations. So as a result of that, the disparity rises and thereby brings more and more social unrest and insecurity. The role of the government to this financial crisis is another important political consideration. Though in economics we say that the government plays a pivotal role, but in most of the cases they are mostly driven by the political ideologies, where government may be too slow or reluctant, or government may be more proactive. This also depends upon how the government is driven by the political turmoils, which can lead to further economic and the social turmoil. This is also seen that some of the governments may be seen as overreacting to crisis, implementing the policies, and thereby all this proactiveness or reluctance is not only driven by the economic considerations, but they are mainly driven by the accountability of these institutions and regulators, how they can cope up with this crisis. So the public demand answers from institutions and regulators regarding who is responsible for the crisis, how it calls for, So this actually leads to more increased regulation and oversight of the financial sector. Because at the end of the day, financial sector has to bear the burden of this loss. So it has to be careful enough or conscious enough about the consequences if any such occurs. The politics of the financial regulation refers to the political factors. What are the political factors? Mainly the financial regulatory bodies, how they are operating. Because most of these bodies are basically driven by the strong, powerful stakeholders who are basically driven by the self-interest motto. And because of this self-interest profit maximization, in most of the times they do not take care of the general masses or do not take care of all the financial regulators so that they can benefit, because they want to benefit their personal interest. So similarly, ideological perspectives on the role of the government can shape the nature. Some politicians may argue that the government regulation should be minimal. Some of them may advocate that they should be more stronger to protect the consumer rights or to protect the consumers and the producers. So there can be difference of opinions, there can be different political school of thoughts across different nations which are largely driven by the political ideologies. And then only we can see that any kind of remedial measure to the financial crisis is not solely economic in nature, because it is slowly driven by the society, the nature of the society, the pattern of the political structures, and how they are dominating their remedial measures. This also comes into the discussion of electoral politics. Because when we talk about the financial regulatory body, in most of the cases, this electoral politics plays an important role, particularly in terms of shaping up the top officials and how they are being selected, or basically democratically, or it has been done unanimously by the stakeholders. So these also are considered most only in align with the party's platform. That means the current government plays an important role in designing the entire member officials or the ex officio members of this regulatory body, which also has a political dimensions in it. Conversely, politicians may also be reluctant because they cannot come up with all these crises, because by combating them, they may become unpopular, or that can harm their populist agenda. So as a result of this, the politics of financial crisis or regulations can shape up the government responses, distribution of the losses, and the accountability of the financial institutions and regulators. Because this has come up in a bigger shape, how the mix of both economics and politics are playing an important role. So political factors are such as the interest of the powerful stakeholders or ideological perspectives, electoral politics. All these are influencing the development and the implementation of the regulations. And thereby the regulations are made, but they have to be fabricated so as to the actual remedial measures can be sorted out, not for satisfying the interest of the powerful elites. This brings him to the discussion regarding some of the social consequences, the political consequences of any kind of mismanagement which can take place within the financial markets. That is, financial markets, income inequality, and political instability. Because these three terms are basically taken up from the adverse impact of this kind of interventions, whether it's from economics or from politics. And this is a complex and a multifaceted one. So financial markets can provide opportunities for wealth accumulation. Definitely more and more economic mobility will take place because people will try to migrate, and there will be more job transfer, and income inequality will come down. This is one of the merit. But on the other hand, it can also result to the concentration of wealth in the hands of few. And this is actually scary because it will lead to the bimodal distribution of wealth. That means it will have multiple peaks. So any kind of income distribution which will have multiple peaks will definitely result to large increase in wage disparity and income inequality. This also will refer to few individuals or groups which will come up, and thereby social unrest, social cohesion will be affected. The political implications are significant because the social justice, the political instability, all will be affected, particularly the law and order and the political dynamics. In many cases, income inequality basically refers to erosion of democracy, because it will lead to more and more dictatorship, whereby the stakeholders will be the powerful groups who will influence the decision-making process and thereby will be exercising capitalistic control. So greater wealth and power will be enjoyed by them if there has been increasing degree of income inequality over time. Inequality may also result to social unrest and political instability. The social unrest may end up with more conflict, and this conflict can be interpersonal, can be across the members of the society, or in a broader perspective across the different countries or the nations. And thereby there will be more degree of deprivation and more bridge between the haves and the have-nots. So this is basically becoming the growth and the development become disillusioned with political institutions and political leaders shaping up the future. So this also is a result of unrest and instability that may occur if income inequality is a result of more and more emergence of financial globalization or financial markets. Financial markets also play an important role in political instability because of the job loss, because of the economic hardship, and more importantly, loss of credibility in the government institutions. Because most of these crises end up in the loss of trust and the credibility, and these elite groups or the political elites captured this deficit and they want to enjoy the wealth and they want to grasp the wealth into their own pockets. So in that way, the trust of the government comes down. So the political implications are profound because there can be loss of legitimacy of political leaders, rise of the anti-establishment movements, and more importantly, there will be more and more social conflict and political conflict together. Institutional context also comes up in this arena because it takes care of the institutional bodies which are there, whether it is driven by a mixed economy or driven by a socialistic pattern or driven by a capitalistic pattern. So the political systems are accountable. So they should be more resilient to these economic shocks because political systems are largely affected in the entire behavioral pattern of the economy, in selection of the political leaders, and at the same time, how they can be coherent in this case. So in all these cases, we can see that they have to be resilient to the economic shocks. Then only the income inequality, the political implications can be controlled. More importantly, we can see that the policy solutions may be the root cause and promote greater economic mobility, but it is very much clear that in order to benefit all the members of the society, there should be proper intervention and a good mix of both economic and the political dynamics. This brings us to some of the discussions on how the political and the economic factors will shape up the financial market. Because financial markets are governed by both of them and both of them play a very, very important or a strong role. First of all, they should shape up the regulatory bodies, particularly the central bank, which will control the money supply, the interest rates, which also demand for the or affects the demand for the financial asset. Fiscal policies also are referring to the tax, public spending, and which will refer to the entire change in the fiscal landscape. So economic conditions such as inflation, economic growth, financial markets, all of them will lead to greater degree of goods and services, but economic growth also is very much necessary for industrial development and at the same time taking care of the political ideologies. This brings in changes in the international trade policies because as we see that with the advent of the trade reforms, more and more goods will be available in the domestic economy and that will totally create a change in the economic and the political landscape. Definitely technological innovation plays an important role because there will be more access to different kind of electronic trading platforms, more investors can be accessible, And more importantly, the regulatory bodies and the regulations should be dealing with this decision. So this is an interconnectedness that the globalization brings in. But nevertheless, each country follows a different political structure. So keeping in view the political ideologies, there should be taken up a kind of a mutual understanding or a strong international cooperation. It should not come up with a zero-sum game with the gain of one country at the cost of the other. More importantly, it is seen that the political and economic factors cannot operate in isolation. That means there is no dichotomy between the two. They have to interact with each other, and as a result of that, economic conditions definitely drive the economic decisions. But the government policies also play an important role in that regard. We can see that the political and economic factors are basically regulating the financial markets, where the investors, the policymakers are aware about it, and more importantly, they are defining the economic policies and the decisions. Because that is more important, because in the decision-making function, the political factors also play an important role. This brings into the implications of the political economy of the financial market, because these implications are taken up from the modern dynamics, how the financial markets are changing over time, and what is the role of the political economy in it. So we can take up the role in terms of multifaceted manner. Firstly, asymmetrical access to investment opportunities. Because we have seen that the financial markets are opening up with a lot of income inequalities, where some groups are having access to all and some groups are permanently deprived. So this has led to very uneven distribution of investment opportunities. So wealthy investors are having a greater knowledge to information, they're more informed in terms of expertise, in terms of experience, in terms of instruments, and they have a deliberate attempt to get higher returns from the investment compared to smaller investors and the retail traders. So this has actually spread across the globe, which calls for asymmetric distribution, because they have more access to risk or more access to returns also at the same time. Secondly, we can see that because of this wealth accumulation, the gap between the rich and the poor has been ever widening. This brings into the Stiglitz theory that globalization has increased the level of economic inequality. So the financial gain cannot be equally acceptable by all. Secondly, we talk about the systemic risk, which means that this has referred to a kind of widespread job loss, foreclosures, and economic turmoil, because this is just like a kind of a trend in the business fluctuations. So when we talk about the business cycle, we find out that the crisis and the recovery comes in alternate patterns. So as a result of this crisis, this has been a systemic risk where, most importantly, the job losses are taking place. So financial market also disrupting the vulnerable populations because their limited access to credit gets affected. Policy solutions are warranted. So by policy solutions, we mean how the policy makers will be more proactive in making a balancing policy in terms of financial regulations, definitely interventions, so that the risks can be mitigated and economic inequality can be reduced. So this will definitely involve greater transparency and disclosure requirements. This is very much important in terms of legal procedures, particularly in terms of accountability and transparency. Then also to promote financial literacy, because this is about the global reach of the financial markets, where they call for more and more inclusiveness, more access to financial services and underprivileged communities. This is also very much important, how the financial weakness and the services can come up. This also refers to the issue that how the market cooperation can be accelerated, how the diversity of the market can come up in terms of more and more players in the market. When in capital market, new derivatives, at the same time microfinance, all these things are needed at one go for developing the masses and for engaging a larger part of the society. The political economy of the financial market is complex because it needs to take up all these issues together. so that there can be more and more protection over the systemic risk. Economic inequality can be reduced, and more importantly, stability can be promoted in the entire financial system. So by stability, we mean a proper kind of cohesion, or the social unrest can be reduced. So in this particular module, the major discussions are dealt with the complex and the multifaceted dynamics of the political economy. So by the political economy, we can see that how the political and the economic factors can be combined with each other. Moreover, it has been seen with the help of a specific case study of 2008-9 financial crisis, how the political dynamics also affected the behavioral pattern of the investors, the financial institutions, and the society. So there is basically a kind of a synergy between the two, which calls for more interventions, more research, how the political and economic factors are interlinked with each other in this type of arena. This also brings in the new financial technologies, the dominance of financial markets, but definitely calls for a proper regulation so that there cannot be more rise in the power elites or wealth accumulation in the hands of few. So it is therefore imperative that more research and more policymakers must pop up in this area, which requires a rigorous analysis of political economy, so that how the financial markets can be more developed, can be more effective, but it should address the most important goals of the entire world economy, which are namely promoting financial stability, inclusive growth, and sustainable development. Then only we can talk about a peace and a sustainable future where the political economy, the economic dimensions, and the finance will be correlated with each other.